Without further ado then, let me introduce Doug Chadwick, who is a wildlife biologist, the author of hundreds of magazine articles and 11 books on natural history and conservation. He's traveled the globe reporting on wildlife and conservation from the Congo to Siberia to the Great Barrier Reef. He's consulted on films, on videos. He's a well-rounded wildlife expert. He's advised the National Museum of Natural History on its Rotunda display. He's active in local conservation, though I know he also scuba dives, skis.
I invented the internet too. That wasn't Al. That wasn't Al.
And sometimes we let him go to be a public speaker as well. His newest book is called The Wolverine Way. It's 275 pages of Wolverine ecology, adventure, and discovery based on 6 years of volunteer field research for the Glacier Wolverine Project. Doug actually promised me that he'd have a juggling act for us in which he's going to keep 4 flaming wolverines up in the air while reciting backwards the wording of the bills proposed by the Montana legislators to gut the Endangered Species Act. He'll keep them all up in the air. He'll say that backwards. He's probably the only guy named Doug on a Friday in northwestern Montana doing this.
Okay.
So without further ado, let me introduce
thank you.
Doug Chadwick.
Thanks. I obviously lie a lot. What drew me so strongly to Many Glacier and to Glacier Park as a whole was a kind of perpetual beginning. Lovely in its contours, breathtaking in scale, the reserve spans a nearly 60-mile length of the Montana Rockies, just south of the Canadian border. It's 1 million acres of continental divide topography, a superstructure of tilted rock layers, white, tan, gray, grayish green, wine red, and more than 1 billion years old. They have tales to tell of great forces at play on the planet, and their stories soar. They shine with alpenglow. They sing in your eyes. They make you want to stay strong for another century, because while you think you could maybe face dying, you can't deal with the idea of one day becoming too old and weak to ramble among these summits anymore. The crags all around are beyond monumental. I'm a moat beneath them. They have endured for eons on end. My existence, by comparison, seems a passing glimmer, like the ring of ripples on a lake from the rise of a trout. The lesson from nature this grand, I would tell myself, is to at least have the grace to be humble. Then I started following wolverines around. They are smaller than I. Their lifespan is considerably shorter. Yet whatever they do undaunted. They live life as fiercely and relentlessly as it has ever been lived. If wolverines have a strategy, it's this: go hard and high and steep and never back down, not even from the biggest grizzly, and least of all from a mountain. Climb everything: trees, cliffs, avalanche chutes, summits. Eat everybody, alive, dead, long dead, moose, mouse, fox, frog, its still warm heart, or frozen bones. We're lucky to have a professional clicker here in the front row. So I want to introduce you to Gulo. Gulo, which means gluttonous glutton, as it was named, which is as gluttony as you can get, and also as the demon of the north. Too solitary and vicious to get along with even others of its own kind. A danger to humans in the woods. They do look kind of like Tasmanian devils on crack. I got to give them that. I mean, and they are gnarly, but they come to us in this century with a reputation hundreds of years old because they exist in the old world too. When it comes to facts about gulo, there were almost none until recently. The thing I need to tell you before I start arm waving and showing pictures is, one reason I'm doing this is that there are fewer than 500 and perhaps no more than 250 left south of Canada. They need a heap of help. There have been petitions to protect them before, and they were always dismissed by the agencies who said they're just too mysterious and elusive. We don't know anything about them. So studies like the one in Glacier Park that I simply volunteered on for years, and another one in the Greater Yellowstone area by Bob Inman of the Wildlife Conservation Society, are tremendously important. We learned a lot, and I want to share some of that with you. But anyway, these guys are starting at a tremendous deficit. This is John James Audubon's rendering of one, which he must have got a really strange specimen that made its way back east. It looks like a kind of snub-nosed otter. This is what they really look like. And this. The native legend is of the fourth bear cub. A mother grizzly had 4 cubs, and the runt of the litter got beat up and kicked around and mistreated so badly that it just ended up perpetually pissed off, and it went off to live alone and be a Wolverine. They do look kind of like bears. One of their common names is the skunk bear, but they're burly, especially some of the males, and like bears and like us, they have what's called plantigrade locomotion, which simply means they walk on their heels, as well as the front of their foot, like your dog and most other carnivores. Spreads their weight on the snow, and that's tremendously important to their lives. The true things about wolverines that people had heard about, one of them is that they do take down, these guys weigh 20 to 45 pounds tops, and yet they do bring down full-grown caribou. They'll stalk them, they'll hunt them, they'll take them down. They have been seen doing the same with moose, adult moose, which is like your house cat nailing a deer in the front yard, right? That's pretty impressive. The other thing that's true is that they're capable of driving adult grizzly bears off a carcass, and wolves and mountain lions. But for a 30-pound animal to drive a grizzly off a carcass is just unmitigated badass behavior. So I knew about that much about wolverines. So I heard that there were some guys starting a study in Glacier Park. I went out to see what it was all about. I planned to spend a day or two and just learn a little more. The first day, the guy I'm with tells me a story of he's radio tracking down in a valley behind this mountain. Another biologist is flying overhead in an airplane, trying hard with his radio antenna to locate animals that haven't been heard from or seen for weeks, because these guys are very hard to follow. The guy down below says, I think she's up near Bear Hat Mountain, which is this one. The guy in the airplane says, cool, I'll go over and we'll try to find her signal from the airplane. You go, whoa, I see her. The guy down below goes, where? And he says, she just summited. And this is the gentle side of Bear Hat, and she came up the other side. So when you go into Glacier Park to try to discover what wolverines are up to, and Glacier Park, by the way, is the single densest, best population left in the lower 48, there's a lot of ways to get in there. And you have to be creative, because the wind blows so strongly, hurricane force at times, that the road is swept free of snow. And you go around a corner, and you're in a whiteout with 20-foot drifts. But if you go far enough into the backcountry, you will find some mini log cabins. This is what we do, guys. This is a radio transmitter to tell you when the lid is down. There's a skin beaver. Trappers are just interested in the pelts, so they would give us the bodies, or we would get roadkill deer and use it for bait. The reason you build a mini log cabin to catch a wolverine is if you use anything metal, a padded steel jaws or a cable snare, that wolverine is going to tear itself up trying to get out. They are relentless and they will not yield. That's the nature of these guys. So the trap door goes down, the signal goes off, you're back in a cabin several miles away, and you just got done tracking all day on skis, and you got your feet up by the fire, and you're full of dinner, and you go, damn. You got to go out, there's a blizzard, it's 10 below, you ski up to the site, and it's not a wolverine. Or it's too late at night, and you say, these logs are 6 to 8 inches thick, we'll go there in the morning, and we'll deal with the animal, because it's risky in the middle of the night. So, yeah. There's no wolverine in there, there's just this. And you can see the log shredding devices they carry along with them. And they have the strongest set of jaws and the strongest bite force among any of these mid-sized carnivores. And in fact, the whole family that the wolverine is in has a bite force almost unmatched on the planet. We did catch a bunch, or rather I should say we got radios on 28 of them, but I said we caught a bunch because we caught a lot of them several times, repeat captures. And the local trappers in northwest Montana would say, I don't believe you guys, there's no way. These are the wiliest, toughest animals to catch in the woods. We smoke all our gear, we tiptoe around, we do everything, and you could never catch a wolverine again. And we'd say, well, the deal is we're scientists and we have a trick. And they'd say, what's that? And I say, well, when we catch them, we don't kill them. So this is M1, first male wolverine caught, carrying his lunchbox around, which we gave him. It's a GPS transmitter. It got smaller, don't worry, over time as they miniaturize components. And also don't worry, wolverines usually got these things off within 2 weeks, sometimes within 2 hours. So, go ahead. Thank you. Okay, this looks like a glory shot of the noble researcher against the Continental Divide. And it is a glory shot to show what we do. And again, when I say we, I wasn't responsible for much. I was a volunteer. They would say, would you take a heavy sled and a heavy pack and ski across an avalanche slope in a blizzard and go check on a trap? And I go, oh, choose me, I want to do it. So anyway, when you catch these guys again and you download their collars, you find out that it's all glory country where they're hanging out. This is the Continental Divide. You're looking at the movements of M1, Mr. Lunchbox, and actually we called him Big Daddy. He's on both sides of the Continental Divide, straddling it. His movements go way off to the east and west, but this is 1 week of movements by Mr. Lunchbox. And although we put it on a Google Earth background in summer, this is in January. There's nothing up there but rocks, ice, and snow on a lot of that. And if I was to cover some of that, just one of those tracks, I'd be bragging about it for years. It would take me months, or at least weeks. This guy does it in a week, week after week. If you take that GPS collar and you program it to record a position every 4 hours, it looks like you're getting a pattern of how they move through the crown of the continent, through this rugged terrain. Except when you get the coordinates, it turns out that this is the first one. The next one is the farthest one on top, 4 hours later on the right, and that's about 12 to 15 miles away. That's how wolverines move. It's like nobody else I know in the wildlife community. And even if you set the device to record information every half hour, you still sometimes can't tell whether the Wolverine took what to us would be a sensible route around the mountain to get to point B, or as I did on his way back, just went over the top. Wolverine route. Next. So who are these guys? They're members of the mustelid family, which is often called the weasel family. If you try to pick up girls and you say you're studying big weasels, that's just doesn't work so good, so we say mustelids. But the whole family is amped up. They have a higher than normal metabolism for animals their size. They're running at a faster RPM. They're tremendously strong. They are, I don't know how to describe it. They just have attitude. This guy is about this big. It's an American pine marten. I was with another guy my size trying to get the bait away from him, and he was bluff charging us. It's like, it's mine. Bring it on. And that's just how they are. And the Wolverine is the largest land-dwelling member of the mustelid family, which, by the way, is the most successful group of carnivores on the face of the planet. It has African zorillas, fruit-eating tyras in South America, 6-foot-long river otters farther south in South America, ferrets, badgers, sea otters, on and on and on. Whatever it is they're doing, it's really good. It's just that we don't hear as much about them because we like bear family members, dog family members, like wolves, coyotes. Well, not Montana, and cats, big and small. Go ahead, Barb. But they do look a bit like members of the weasel family, long and tubular, when they're crouched down trying to grab a ground squirrel or a marmot. But if you strip off that double fur coat, what you have is a life support system for a set of legs and strong jaws. And that's how you can begin to see how they move through the country. These guys are all, and look at the size of those with the crampons up front. So you've got a snowshoe effect that's unmatched for an animal that weight. And that's why they dominate or can outcompete other carnivores in the alpine and subalpine areas, the top of the world, the crown of the continent. Deep, lingering snow, because that's where they have their dens. And their dens are 10 to 12 feet deep in the snowpack. That snowpack has to last through mid-May. Now, anyway, and then they run horizontally for up to 75 feet through the snow, tunneled through, with chambers for sleeping, eating, latrine areas, and birth chambers. It's quite elaborate. No dens had been found until the 1980s on North America. And by the 1990s, there were only a few known in Alaska. There's still only a couple dozen known in the whole continent, and half of those were found during this project. And one thing we found is they often take the horizontal part of their den underneath the skeleton of whitebark pines that have fallen. And a lot of you probably know whitebark pines are disappearing due to exotic infestations and probably enhanced by, I don't like that word, exaggerated by climate change ongoing in the Rockies. So, they're born white as little polar bears, 2 to 4 in a litter, average closer to 2. They get darker as they get older. They get cuter. I don't know how, this is a bit dark, but you can see the size of the feet. This is 8 to 10 weeks old. So we would go up to where they're denning, that's the top of the divide in the background, and dig them out and cuddle them. And this is Jeff Copeland, who was the principal investigator of the Glacier Wolverine Project. He worked here in Missoula at the Rocky Mountain Research Lab, Forest Service outfit. And this is the part that's a little tough to explain, but we would implant small transmitters under their bellies. Because you can't put a collar on young animals. It'll choke them as they grow. We don't like going into sacred ground of a national park and cutting open the wildest of wild animals and sticking gadgets in them. It sucks. But nobody knew a thing about survival of these juveniles and what they're up against. And when you're trying to save a creature, you know, you get a little scientific about it. And what we found is not surprising in the sense they spend a lot of time socializing, the juveniles do, with each other. And mom would leave them in these deep snow-packed dens while she goes off hunting as far as 10 miles away. And then after they emerge in mid-May, they're born in late February, and they're in there the whole time. They emerge in mid-May. She caches them in rendezvous sites like boulder fields or really thick subalpine fir copses that you cannot crawl through, but they could get in and hide. And then she goes off and brings back food all through the summer, getting ground squirrels or whatever. So this is a younger Jeff Copeland who said, I think there's something else going on with wolverines. In addition to this relation to cold temperatures, deep lingering snows, an ability to climb like nothing we've ever seen, and cover ground like nothing we've ever seen. He says, I don't think the old myths are right about the essential nature of these groups of wolverines. They were supposed to be so surly that the only time they got together was for mating. And you know, kind of, we tell these stories about carnivores. If they got a gnarly reputation, we say, well, they're solitary and can't stand each other. They're too vicious. They can hardly stand and nurse their young. Or if you're mating, it's just like, come here, baby, but don't expect me to talk to you afterwards. And I'm in a really bad mood already. But anyway, we found out that the kids do become independent of mom at 6 months. But then before that, we would find dad in the den with the kits and with mom. And right up to then, the idea was that if the father discovered a den, he would probably kill the young, steal their food, and go off, yeah, I'm a Wolverine, that's what we do. But no, he's there with the family. And after they became independent of mom, the siblings would hang out with each other. Sometimes they would go back and they would spend time with mom, or they would at least follow her tracks. And sometimes they would go off and hang out with dad and travel with him for a while. It's a joint custody arrangement, the likes of which has not been seen in other species of mammals. So it's a unique thing. More importantly, these guys are trying to make a living on the top of the world under very difficult conditions. And the ability to stay within your parents' territories for another year, full year, is terrifically important. You don't have to go out and take your chances in unfamiliar terrain, deal with other larger, more experienced wolverines who may kill you. And you will learn where the food is best obtained. You will learn how to be a badass wolverine from hanging out with your dad, and so on. So this is a big, big change in how we view this animal. Also, the transmitters would tell us what didn't work for them as far as making a living. Don't cross avalanche slopes, and there's a zillion of them in Glacier. That's what happened to F5, a lovely young subadult female. She died in an avalanche. She was the one that summited Bear Hat Mountain. She died not long afterwards in an avalanche not far away. F21, a 6-month-old female, was crossing the face of Pegam Mountain in September, still with her mom, and she forgot when the first snow came how slippery that makes the slopes, and she fell to her death down the whole face of the mountain. Some of the wolverines from our study went outside the park, ended up in traps. Montana still has maybe 150 wolverines, if that many. It's still legal to trap and to shoot wolverines in the state. But maybe that doesn't matter so much. Coyote traps, bobcat traps, otter traps, whatever. Wolverines are expert scavengers, and they're designed to go find anything out there and try to make use of it. They will crunch up bones that wolves and bears leave, big thick femurs with those heavy jaws, and they eat the bone itself, not just the marrow, which has a lot of fats and oils in it. But anyway, we lost some that way. That happens a lot. This one was killed on a highway. This is a yearling, by the way. That's a really big animal. If they weighed about 10 more pounds, none of us could go outdoors, I don't think. These are... Okay, so double fur coat, big snowshoe feet, a reliance, an obligate relationship with deep lingering snowpack for denning. Females are very sensitive. They'll leave if they discover human tracks or other tracks quite close. Amped up metabolism, on and on. They are built for snow and cold. Copeland and a colleague, Kevin McKelvey, analyzed where wolverines are and also found that they don't have a range in places where the average maximum daily temperature in summer is above 70 degrees. So they don't tolerate heat either. So obviously, you've got a climate change critter here. Grinnell Glacier in the heart of Glacier Park in 1938. Last year. If you're up digging young wolverines out of a den in the middle of the night, 2,000 feet up the slope, you call our veterinarian, Dan Savage, another volunteer. This is the nature of the people that make these projects go. And Dan drives 5 hours from Kalispell around the park to skis 11 miles in Many Glacier, hikes 2,000 feet up the slope, and does surgery or does drugs, whatever is required in the middle of the night at 10 below. Amazing people made this thing go. He's kind of pretty. We call him Prince Valiant. And my wife works at a backcountry chalet in Glacier, and one of the older ladies who is from Tennessee, she was very conservative, read the Bible a lot, and disapproved of a lot of things that people do. But Dan Savage, the veterinarian, went up hiking that direction. He stopped in at the chalet and he talked to this lady for a couple hours about wolverines and whatnot. And when my wife came back from hiking that day, the older woman said, "Well, I think I know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life." And my wife said, she had no idea what was going on. She said, "Well, that's great. What is it?" And the woman said, "I'm going to get me a real sick dog and move to Montana." And this is Dave Murray, who owns a Industrial Technologies here in Missoula, your hometown. And it's a big operation. He has a lot of people working for him, and he just can't wait to skip out, leave everybody hanging, and go chase wolverines. Because deep down, like I think everyone on this project, he kind of wanted to be a wolverine. Well, he kind of looks kind of Genghis-y, kind of. He's cute too, but you know, in that way. And the thing is, you watch how they cover this country. You watch how they don't back down from grizzlies. You realize they don't take crap from anybody or anything. And part of you wants to be a wolverine. I'm not just exaggerating. I admire them unreservedly. But you don't, whatever your feelings and whatever your scientific inclinations, I don't think you need much of an excuse to be in country like this, doing this kind of work. And that's what that picture's for. M1's son, M3, I mentioned Genghis Khan. We called this guy the Genghis Khan of Gulos because as he aged, the son took off on his own and started carving a territory to the north of his dad's. He kicked out the older guy living there. He kicked out that guy's son. He took over his women. He went on and kept expanding his empire and doing more of this. And as he was headed north again on another round of his conquest areas, M3 ran into Mount Cleveland, the highest peak in the park, 10,466 feet. It's a mountain, right? So M3 goes up here and there, up here. And he doesn't go right to the summit. He goes across that wall, on down the ridge, and carries on. He covered 4,900 vertical feet in 90 minutes. I don't know how many of you might be climbers, but that's kind of a... anyway, and it's the kind of thing I end up telling people about because it is impressive, but you try and doing this arm waving and try to get people to focus on an extraordinary animal. I think it's as charismatic as they come, or whatever the term would be, but it's been ignored. When I'm walking down the trails in Glacier holding a radio antenna, people always stop and ask what's going on. But that's because Glacier has a whole bunch of grizzly bears, and they always assume you're tracking bears. And you say Wolverines, and people go, oh, huh? And then they start telling you stories of the marmots they saw, or are they like little wolves? If I run into one, do I play dead and cover my neck? All that kind of stuff. I ran into one woman who had seen a wolverine carrying a gold mantle ground squirrel in its mouth about 2 minutes before I came up the trail and saw the same thing. And she waited and she told me all about the muskrat she saw carrying a chipmunky thing to the lake to go for a ride. And all you can think is, wow, it's really fascinating to live in her world. That's got to be great. But in describing wolverines, this is part of what you have to include. There's nobody else like it. Because after M3 went over Mount Cleveland, he continued on. Look at the red one, up into Waterton Lakes Park in Alberta, back down, covering the whole northeastern corner of Glacier Park. That's in 7 to 10 days, again in winter, even though this is a summer map. And then he did the same thing more or less again on the green route, only took in a little bit of another province. Why not? If you're an empire builder, that's the kind of stuff you do. So this guy has got the whole northeast corner of Glacier, a couple of provinces. M13, another male, had a territory kind of went like this. How many wolverines can you fit into Glacier Park? And the answer is, if you count the fact that the male territories overlap those of a couple females, add in the young, half of which will survive in a given year, it's still 40 to 50 animals. This same 1,500 square mile reserve holds 350 grizzly bears, weighing up to 600 pounds. 40 to 50 wolverines, of which 12 to 13 will be breeding adults that will successfully pass their genes on to the next generation. That's not a viable population over time. This is their former range, outlined in red. It extended quite far east. It went down into corners of New Mexico, it went into Colorado, Utah, and the southern Sierras. The current distribution of wolverines is right here, these little dots, each of which is not a population, but an enclave too small to support itself over time. There are half a dozen to a dozen in the North Cascades of Washington. This is, all I want to do is point out that this says 730 square miles and this says 760 square miles. For an animal this big in some of the most rugged country you can imagine, that is just jaw-dropping. And tightly, that's okay. Tightly tied to lingering snowpack as well. So what you have is an animal that doesn't exist in the lower 40 anymore as a continuous population. Scientists call it a metapopulation, with these little groups here and there that can survive over time only if they somebody is getting from population A to population B once in a while. And this means landscape linkages, corridors, wild ways, whatever you want to call it, they need to be connected. They need freedom to roam. So we tell ourselves that we've protected wildlife, we've protected nature, because we've got a wonderful system of reserves, both in Canada and the US. But not one of them is big enough to keep wolverines going by itself. Not one of them is big enough to keep grizzlies going by itself, or any number of other animals. Gene pool just isn't big enough. Isolated, these areas are becoming more and more like islands as the areas around them get developed. So the challenge to preserving nature is not to say, well, we did a pretty good job already, why don't we pat ourselves on the back and go home? It's to say, we did a great job, we got the first part done. But that's a 100-year-old model of nature protection. Now that we know more about genetics, and now that we know how often habitat change happens through fire, drought, insect infestation, whatever, we think these are catastrophes. To nature, they are absolutely normal events over the centuries. And now with climate change added in, we need to finish the job. We need to connect them. We need freedom to roam for four-leggeds, two-leggeds, four-leggeds, both of us, all of us. And if someone can hit that light switch, that lower one, I'd like to read one more thing. In late summer of 2007, M16, who occupied drainages between the territories of M1 and M13, was found dead on a high ridge when a park employee tracked down the mortality signal from his implant. The cause of his demise remains listed as an unknown predator. And that's because some of the holes in his skull were small enough they could have been from a meeting with another territorial wolverine. That happens. But there were much larger holes that were grizzly tooth sized. And there was a bighorn sheep carcass about 100 yards away. Such evidence adds up to at least a hint that the most notoriously badass behavior gulos practice, competing with great bears for carcasses, is every bit as dangerous as it sounds. While various naturalists have witnessed wolverines driving bears away, researchers have also reported instances of bears killing wolverines. Gulo can't afford to be one iota bolder or more reckless than it already is, or the species would lose too many members. To thrive in the niche it has claimed for itself, this modest-sized carnivore just has to be a little bolder and a little more reckless than everybody else, which is why I think it's accurate to say there's wild and then there's wolverine. They're indomitably wild. They want nothing to do with either our romantic tableau of charming wild beasts that want to be our friends, or our screwy fantasies where gulos play the role of diabolical enemies. They have no truck with illusions. It's part of what I think of as the Wolverine pledge to never equivocate or deal in half-truths, which of course is not really theirs, but mine. I'm from the species that struggles daily to distinguish the truth from its own half-truths and lies. When you load nature up with human opinions, dreams, and nightmares, the results might make for more dramatic stories, but nature is always diminished in the end. Taken straight, the Wolverine way, nature offers more real excitement, adventure, meaning, freedom, and hope than any version we've ever cooked up. This is what I learned from being on these animals' trail. Gulos don't need a few secure areas to survive. They need lots of secure areas. Big ones and healthy corridors of protected land to link populations and the genes they carry. They need to be part of a robust community of predators and an overflow of varied prey. They need full, thriving, vital populations of all these animals That's where a scavenger omnivore like a wolverine is going to do best. As the wolverine becomes better known at last, it adds a fierce emphasis to the message that every bear, wolf, lynx, and other major carnivore keeps giving. If the living systems we choose to protect aren't large and strong and interconnected, then we aren't really conserving them. Not for the long term, not with some real teeth in the scenery. We're just talking about saving nature while we settle for something less wild. So I think we need to finish the job, and I think the wolverines can show us how to do that. The scale on which we need to be working, especially in an area of ongoing climate change. That's the sermon, and thank you all for coming and attending. Thanks, guys. My instructions were to have a question session. I'm sorry I have 45 minutes. That was all right. Yep.
Are there any Wolverines in Michigan?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Outside of the university, right? The big deal was for almost 2 centuries, no, and then one showed up a few years ago. And it lived in a really odd place in a swamp in a low elevation area, and it didn't react much to people, and nobody knows whether this is a different kind of wolverine that maybe did come down on its own from far north, or one that somebody turned loose. It died this year, and so no, there are no more wolverines in Michigan, in the Wolverine state. But there aren't any golden bears in California either, right? Yeah.
You had mentioned obviously that they have a large territory and they travel. My question is, do they travel as much in the summertime and up a snow cover? And then my second question is, what kinds of scavenging are they doing out there? I'm assuming it's searching for food, but what kind of food are they finding that time of year in that environment?
That was a little bit about the part about eat everything. You'll see them, well, the real question is when you look at that snowy mountaintop with 20 foot of snow and 100-foot drifts, why are they up there? Well, they do in Glacier Park dive down into the valleys and at least make a circuit. In areas like central Idaho or elsewhere, like in BC, where it's a much longer distance to the valley bottoms, they tend to stay high throughout the year. But they will go dig down through 10 or 20 feet of snow and excavate hibernating marmots and ground squirrels. They will grab ptarmigan and snowshoe hares and squirrels en route. They will eat voles and mice. If they find a moose stranded in snow and unable to move very well, oh man. One thing I wrote about, with game management, we always try to make a perfect natural world by our lights. So we try to harvest the maximum sustained yield of animals like elk and deer because we don't want to have a winter kill. But why do animals like wolverines, scavengers, exist? I mean, if there's a winter kill, and we have a really tough winter and a lot of dead ungulates around, they're like, yeah, that's why we're here. That's what we're built for. But they will also, last way to answer this, they kill a mountain goat or they find a mountain goat. They regularly go below goat and sheep cliffs looking for avalanche victims. It's a regular spring movement because there's enough of them that it pays off. But they may take one of their own. But they won't stay there and gorge on it day after day. They'll gorge a while and then they'll cache the food. And they'll dig it down into snowbanks. They'll stick it in boulder fields with cold water running under it like a refrigerator. And then come back and dig that up anytime in the next 6 months to a year. They are not picky. So does that kind of get at that, I think? Yep.
Are there any documented incidents where wolverines attack human beings?
Not outside of a cabin or a trap that I know of. I had a guy call me from the Northwest Territories the other day and say, I heard you did a book on wolverines. Yeah. So, well, tell me about the people they've killed. There's a lot of BS stories floating around. And believe me, when we opened those traps, those log cabins, man, these things are just like, it's like, oh good, we got a velociraptor, we're all gonna die. And they will not back down, they'll come for you every damn time. You don't want to corner one, and you don't want to try to take his carcass away from it, right? But I've never heard of a documented case of somebody meeting one in the woods and the Wolverine. But again, to give you just a little bit more idea of their nature, we'd let them out of the trap and the lynx would just be gone, or if we caught a fox or something, they're gone. But a Wolverine looks around and then runs like heck 75 feet and then puts on the brakes and go, wait a minute, I don't have to run from these guys. There's only 4 of them, you know? And there's a beaver in that. There's a beaver carcass in there. And then they start circling around and marking, and we never got attacked. And when we dug kits out of a deep den, Mom would come up through the snow like a Titan missile. But she didn't attack anybody, she just would circle us. And out of this 200 square mile range of the male that had fathered those young, several times one just magically appeared when we were doing this. I don't know how that works. It could have been coincidence, but he too would join the female and then he would circle us, but nobody ever went for us. So that's the most insight I can give you on that. Anybody else? Yes, sir?
Could you give us some sense of what these things look like when they move? I had a friend who saw one. He lives up by Glacier at the head of Lake Sherburne, and he thought it was a monkey at first. He just said the movements with the big long legs were confusing to him, and it took him a while to figure out. Could you give us a sense of what they look like when they're moving around?
That actually was a monkey. That was a snow monkey. The way to tell a mustelid, a great way to tell a mustelid, is they have a 2x2 track. That's their default locomotion. The front feet come down, one just slightly ahead of the other, press down the snow. This is a key to winter travel. The hind legs come up and land in the same place, so it's already packed. So they don't go fast. They go a steady 2 to 4 miles, probably less, 2 to 3 miles an hour. But they don't ever stop, except they have an hour or 2 rest. But they go day and night, and this lope is the default. And I watched them in captivity, and when they walk, it's just the most ungainly thing you've ever seen. It's just really weird. And it looks like a porcupine or something. But it turns out their legs are so long, and those feet are so big, that they can't, when they're walking, if they were to bring their rear foot straight forward, or even their front feet, they're going to be dragging them. So a lope is actually more efficient because back is arching and they're springing. And that way you can, and that's how they truck through the countryside. And when you said monkeys, though, I did think they are great climbers. And also in captivity, you see them swinging around. They look like gigantic monkeys crossed with squirrels that would kind of rip your head off and eat your lungs if you got between them and the next one. But they're really, really agile. And they can bend over and kiss their rear end goodbye, literally. I mean, they're very squirmy and flexible. We saw a eagle pick up a young one and start carrying it off, and that was not a good idea, because it doesn't matter what part of it you got, this thing is going to bend around, and that Wolverine got dropped really quick. Yep.
Presumably they've done some DNA work as part of this study, and has that confirmed that these are isolated populations?
Yeah. They've got a genetic base for the Wolverine populations in both the Yellowstone area and Glacier. What was the second part of the question?
So has that confirmed whether these are isolated or whether there is any movement between the populations?
I'm probably not the guy to answer that, because I don't know where the cutoff point is. Some good news. I gotta back up. Wolverines were probably completely extirpated from the lower 48 states early in the 20th century from unrestricted trapping, shooting, but most of all probably predator poisons. And they have since come back in. So part of the whole genetics in the lower 48 depends on who came in and where they came from. But they did build up again. And then states like Montana put an unlimited trapping season on them. Like, well, every trapper got to take at least one, but there were 4,000 trappers in the state. And so they were back down pretty quickly, plus habitat disturbance and fragmentation. So it's a big question you're asking, but I really don't know. I've been told the crossroads for the different genetic groups in North America is probably up towards Northwest Territories. And the reason they're looking into this is Colorado wants to put some wolverines back in the state, which is pretty great news. They did reintroduce lynx, and it was really successful. The public, how can you not like lynx? The public likes that whole program, and now they're talking wolverines. And it's partly, I think, because the wolverine recently traveled from the Tetons 500 miles down to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, where it's currently living at 10 to 12,000 feet. And another one seems to have come from somewhere up here in the northern Rockies down to Lake Tahoe, California, 600 miles. Neither one of these young wolverine males brought a date, so I don't know what this will lead to, but I'm really glad to hear Colorado's considering putting them back. So, anyway, yeah.
Kind of related to the other gentleman's question, how many subspecies are there, or are there any subspecies?
They recognize right now the one in Europe that goes, it's been reduced to northern populations in Scandinavia, where there are several hundred, and northern Russia. And that's a different subspecies than the North American one. And then there was one, according to some taxonomists, on Vancouver Island, because they've been separated by that ocean passage long enough to qualify as a different subspecies, but nobody can find a wolverine on Vancouver Island anymore. It's been heavily logged and a lot more access, and they just disappeared. Yep.
So this might have a little bit to do with that crossover population, but when you talk about corridors,
Yep.
what is it that you envision? What would be an ideal?
Well, the reason that's a good question is when conservationists talk about landscape linkages and corridors, I think a lot of people, especially those that don't like greenies, think you're talking about a super park and big wildways throughout the West. It's going to interfere with a lot of things. I haven't seen any designs like that. The idea is to pick places where there's a minimum of disturbance, especially during the denning season. That would be heli skiing, snowmobile parks, and intensive recreation from cross-country skiing or downhill skiing. The other thing would be to pick places where we have the best chance of having deep, continuous snow cover, even if the climate warms a bit more or a lot more, and go ahead and try to safeguard those and make sure you just don't have, if you've got roads, consider underpasses. They use them a lot in Banff National Park. If you're going to have clear cuts, leave some stringers for cover, that kind of thing, both to hold the snow and for the animals to be concealed. Consider having some trap-free areas, at least around denning areas, at least around the corridors. It wouldn't take up thousands and thousands of acres. It would take up hundreds in just exactly the right kind of places. So, okay, in a nutshell, for wolverines, mostly along mountaintops. Selway Bitterroot, Continental Divide, and Bob Marshall. We've got some pretty great ones mostly made. If we can get them from the Bob Marshall over into the north end of the Bitterroot or over into the Cabinet Yaak and down, these guys then are interconnected. And it wouldn't take a ton. We've got a lot of public land to work with in the West already, so it isn't taking things away from people. Thank you for asking also, because I get to say there's some literature in the back on a conservation land trust called Vital Ground, based here in Missoula, out of Fort Missoula. I'm a founding board member of it. That's what we do, is protect the private land in between some of the big expanses of public land, usually down in the valleys and the places where people concentrate, and we're trying to make those permeable to animals from bears to elk, to wolverines, to lynx, etc. So please grab some on your way out. Yeah, one more, or,
Okay, said mountaintop corridors. Was that their traditional habitat, or have it just been forced there by humans?
judging by where they stay, look, I didn't give very good perspective on this. If you go up north to Alaska, the Northwest Territories, wolverines don't need rugged terrain. They use it. They're really good at using it. But it's that deep snow and the year-round cold temperatures they're after. They can find that as you go farther north in a lot of places. As you go south, the only places you can find it, you have to keep going up in elevation. So I doubt there weren't many reports of wolverines out, like you know, grizzlies in Kansas. No. Okay. I think we're there. Okay, thanks again, guys.